Imagine living each day feeling calm, grounded, and completely at peace with who you are. Imagine carrying a quiet confidence in your heart, knowing that no matter what happens around you, you are whole on the inside. But tell me the truth, how many times have you felt lost, broken, or like a part of you is missing? We go through life chasing goals, chasing people, chasing validation, hoping it will finally make us feel complete. But it never does, because wholeness isn't something we find out there. It's something we gently remember, deep within ourselves. The way you speak to yourself, the way you treat your own heart, defines how you experience life. If you move through your day with softness, with compassion, with wisdom, you feel strong, even in silence. But if you keep judging yourself, rushing, trying to be someone you're not, then even your best days will feel empty. Today, you're going to discover the most gentle teachings that can help you feel whole again. These aren't just nice ideas. They are ancient truths that heal, calm, and bring you back to yourself. So get ready, because after this, the way you treat your mind and your heart will never be the same again. Before we start, I want you to make a promise to yourself. Write in the comments, "I choose peace." You're not just writing a sentence, you're planting a seed of healing, of self-love, of quiet strength. The more you repeat it, the more it grows. So write it down now, and let's begin. Let's be honest, there are moments when you lie awake at night, not because you're not tired, but because your mind doesn't know how to stop. Thoughts tumble over one another like waves that don't know when to rest. It's not loud or dramatic, it's subtle, like a tension behind the eyes or a tightening in the chest that no one sees. Most people think the answer is to try harder, meditate harder, relax harder, force peace into the body like pushing a river to flow the other way. But deep down, you know that force has never really worked. The more pressure you apply, the more distant peace becomes. There's a gentler way, a quieter way, a path where you don't have to fight to be okay. This is what soft awareness offers, a way of being with your mind and body that doesn't demand anything, but gently invites everything. Soft awareness begins when you stop treating your attention like a spotlight and start treating it like a warm light in a quiet room. You're not watching your thoughts like a guard on duty. You're simply being with them, without trying to fix or push them away. That small shift from controlling to allowing starts to change the way your nervous system behaves. Neuroscientists have found that when you observe your thoughts without judgment, without trying to control them, the brain begins to rewire itself. The default mode network responsible for rumination, overthinking, self-comparison starts to quiet down. It's not magic, it's biology. The more you rest in open awareness, the more your brain learns that it's safe to let go. But soft awareness isn't laziness. It's not zoning out. It's active in a quiet way. Like holding a child who's been crying for hours, not because you have a solution, but because your presence is enough. When you turn this kind of presence inward, you meet parts of yourself that you've ignored for years. The thought patterns you've fought against, the emotions you've labeled as too much, even the stories you carry about not being good enough. When you stop resisting them and just notice them, they begin to lose power. Not because you shut them down, but because you stopped feeding them energy through fear. Awareness that doesn't cling or reject becomes healing on its own. Buddhist teachings have long spoken of this. In Satipatthana, 4 Foundations of Mindfulness, the invitation is not to control the mind, but to notice the body, feelings, mind, states, and mental objects with clarity and kindness. That word kindness changes everything. Mindfulness is not a weapon. It's not there to silence your inner world. It's there to welcome it with understanding. Let's start with the body. So many people try to escape the body. They use it like a tool, but live mostly in their heads. The body holds a record of everything you've lived through. But when you bring soft awareness to the breath, to the warmth in your hands, to the tightness in your chest, you're telling the body, I see you. You can stop bracing now. The breath becomes a gateway. Not because you need to breathe in a perfect way, but because the breath is always here. And when you follow it softly, not rigidly, it shows you that the present moment can carry you without effort. Each breath says, you don't need to do anything right now. Then there are feelings. Some people avoid them. Others drown in them. But there is a third way. Stay with them gently. Not analyzing, not fixing, not labeling. Just sensing. Feelings rise and fall when you give them space. And when you don't name them as good or bad, something shifts. You begin to see that even sadness, even fear, are just visitors. Soft awareness lets feelings pass without turning them into identities. You're no longer an anxious person. You're a person feeling a moment of anxiety, and soon it moves on like a cloud that never meant to stay. The mind itself can be the trickiest. It loves to plan, compare, criticize, fantasize. But when you see those thoughts without grabbing onto them, something beautiful happens. Thoughts become just thoughts. You're not in them, you're aware of them. And here's something that most people miss. When you don't fight the thought, it loses its stickiness. It doesn't pull you in like quicksand. Soft awareness creates distance. Not a cold distance, but a kind one, like watching a leaf float past on a stream. Now this doesn't mean you'll never get caught up again. You will. We all do. But when your habit becomes returning to gentle noticing, the mind begins to trust that it doesn't need to scream to be heard. Satipatthana also teaches awareness of Dhamma mental objects or teachings. This means noticing when the 5 hindrances show up: craving, aversion, restlessness, sleepiness, and doubt. But here's where softness matters again. You're not supposed to fight the hindrances. That just creates more tension. You notice them. Ah, restlessness is here. And that's it. You don't need to make it go away. Just by naming it softly without shame, you disarm it. It's like a spotlight turns into candlelight. The mind becomes less reactive, more curious. Curiosity is a powerful friend to soft awareness. When you're curious, you're open. You're not judging, you're exploring. And when you explore your inner world with gentleness, you find something surprising. You're not broken, you're just layered. Layers of belief, layers of fear, layers of habits you picked up to survive. But underneath all that, stillness, wholeness, awareness that never left you just got buried. People often ask, how do I stay mindful all day? But the better question is, how do I return again and again without beating myself up for forgetting? That's where real change begins. Not in perfection, but in the softness of return. Let's talk about the nervous system for a moment. When you're in a constant state of doing, solving, achieving, your system stays in fight or flight. You might not notice it, but your body does. Muscles stay tight, breathing gets shallow, sleep becomes difficult. But when you rest in soft awareness, you activate something called the parasympathetic nervous system, the body's natural healing mode. Heart rate slows, breath deepens, digestion improves, and your body starts to remember what safety feels like. This isn't about deep meditation or silent retreats. It's about how you relate to this moment, right now. Can you notice the texture of your shirt against your skin? Can you feel your jaw and let it relax just a little? Can you let your next breath come to you instead of pulling it in? That's soft awareness. One of the most powerful aspects of this practice is how it begins to dissolve inner judgment. You stop labeling thoughts as good or bad. You stop criticizing yourself for not doing enough. You just notice. And in that noticing, healing happens. Compassion grows in silence, and when you stop fighting yourself, you begin to see others differently too. That person who irritates you, they're caught in their own storm. You don't excuse their behavior, but you don't take it personally either. Your awareness becomes less sharp, more spacious. This kind of presence changes relationships. You start listening more than fixing. You pause before reacting. You speak more slowly, with less urgency, because you're not trying to prove anything anymore. You're just being here. Soft awareness also invites surrender, but not the kind where you give up, the kind where you let go of needing to control every detail. You start to trust that things unfold, that clarity comes, that emotions pass. This doesn't mean you become passive. On the contrary, when you stop wasting energy on control, you have more energy to take wise action, action from a calm center, not from panic. You begin to discover a rhythm in your life that isn't based on pressure. You move when it's time to move. You rest when it's time to rest. You listen to the body. You honor the heart. And something else begins to shift. Your relationship with discomfort. Pain, whether physical or emotional, used to be something to avoid. Now it becomes something to stay with, not because you enjoy it, but because you're no longer afraid of it. You learn to hold pain the way you'd hold a frightened child, not pushing it away, not letting it take over, but simply being with it until it softens. This kind of practice gives you resilience, and not the hard kind that pushes through everything, but the soft kind that bends without breaking. It also brings joy, not the loud, performative kind, but the quiet kind that bubbles up when nothing is missing, when you're sipping tea and you realize you're truly there. That's the gift of soft awareness. The world tells you to hustle, to be productive, to prove your worth. But the deepest truths aren't found in effort. They're found in stillness, in breath, in presence. You don't need to be better, you just need to be here. And that's where this journey leads. Not to a new version of you, but to the real you, the one who was never lost, just waiting for you to notice. So tonight, as your head touches the pillow, don't try to meditate. Don't try to be mindful. Just feel the warmth of the blanket, the weight of your body, the kindness in your breath. Let your awareness be soft. Let it hold you. Let it carry you home. Even the quietest kind of peace can feel incomplete when you've learned to leave parts of yourself behind. You may carry calm in your breath, softness in your awareness, and still feel like something is missing, like a room in your inner house remains locked. There is a reason. Soft awareness opens the door, yes. But who you welcome inside is what completes the journey. That's where we go now, not just into presence, but into love. Not love in theory, not love as a performance, but the kind of love you once needed and never received. The kind you owe yourself. Somewhere along the way, you learned to split yourself into acceptable and unacceptable, to present only the parts others liked, the smiling, capable, responsible version. The one who doesn't cry too much, who doesn't take up space, who always puts others first. You became so good at it, you forgot you were doing it. The parts you pushed away didn't die. They simply went quiet. The Buddhist practice of metta, or loving kindness, is not just about sending good wishes to strangers or loved ones. It's about turning toward the places within you that you've learned to avoid, that you labeled too sensitive, too angry, too needy, too much. Metta is not a concept, it's a practice. It's what happens when you sit with the part of you that still carries the bruise of childhood rejection. The version of you who was told they weren't smart enough, pretty enough, tough enough. It's when you stop trying to fix that part and start listening to it. This work begins with acknowledgement. Most of us walk around numb to our own self-rejection. It hides behind achievement, behind self-help, behind overthinking. It says things like, "I just want to improve," or "I should be over this by now." But metta is not self-improvement, it's self-returning. It's saying to those quiet corners of your being, "You are welcome here, even now, especially now." You begin not by feeling love, but by intending it. That's the secret. Metta is not about feeling warm or emotional. It's about planting the seed seven when the soil feels dry. You say the phrases not because you already believe them, but because you are learning how to believe them. May I be safe, may I be well, may I be happy, may I live with ease. You start there, slowly, gently. Sometimes you'll feel resistance. That's part of the process. You've trained your mind for years to believe it must earn love. You've whispered cruel things to yourself that you would never say to someone else. Undoing that takes time and patience. The purpose of this practice is not to create fake happiness. It's to bring compassion to what is already here. If you feel sadness, let the wish for safety hold it. If you feel anger, let the wish for ease cradle it. You don't need to clean yourself up before offering kindness. That's the whole point. Every time you repeat the phrases, you're creating new mental grooves. You're teaching your brain that it's safe to care for yourself. Over time, your nervous system begins to relax. Not because you forced it, but because kindness makes the body feel safe. This work can awaken long-forgotten memories. You may feel tears and not know why. You may feel nothing at all. Both are welcome. The goal is not to chase a feeling, but to stay present. You're not trying to replace sadness with love. You're trying to meet sadness with love. That's different. One is rejection, the other is reconciliation. Loving kindness also transforms how you speak to yourself. The inner critic thrives in silence. It repeats old scripts from parents, teachers, or peers, scripts you never agreed to, but learned to obey. When you start offering kindness, the critic gets quieter, not because it's defeated, but because it's finally heard. The inner critic, too, is a wounded part, often scared, often trying to protect you. When you say, "May I be kind to myself," you're including the critic too. You begin to build a new inner language, not fake positivity, but truthful care. You say things like, "This is hard, and I'm doing my best." Or, "I don't have to be perfect to be worthy." Or even just, "I'm allowed to be tired." These are not slogans, they're lifelines. Metta brings you face to face with abandonment, not just by others, but the ways you abandoned yourself, the hobbies you gave up to please someone else, the boundaries you never set, the voice you silenced to keep the peace. This practice doesn't shame you for those choices, it understands them, but it also invites you to return. What would it mean to offer kindness to the version of you who never felt chosen? It might mean writing a letter to your younger self, not to fix the past, but to acknowledge it. It might mean standing in front of the mirror and saying the phrases out loud, even if your voice shakes. It might mean simply placing a hand on your heart when you feel alone. Small gestures, quiet revolutions. Loving kindness is not just for the mind, it's for the body too. The body that's carried tension for years, that's held its breath waiting for permission to rest, that's been punished with overwork or neglected in silence. You can practice metta with movement. When you stretch in the morning, do it with care, not force. When you eat, let it be nourishment, not reward or punishment. When you bathe, let the water be a reminder, I am worth tending to. Metta is not about waiting to feel whole. It's about treating yourself as if you are whole and letting the truth of that rise to the surface over time. This practice also ripples outward. When you've truly faced your own pain with love, you begin to see others differently. Their anger no longer feels threatening. Their distance no longer feels personal. You recognize the hurt beneath their actions. This doesn't mean you excuse bad behavior, but you respond, not react. That's a powerful shift. Boundaries created through metta are stronger than walls built from fear. You say no, not because you're angry, but because you value your peace. You walk away, not because you're cold, but because you've finally returned to yourself. Even joy becomes more accessible, not the kind you chase, but the kind you notice. The warmth of the sun on your face, the quiet of an early morning, the smile that rises for no reason. When you're not rejecting yourself, life feels less heavy. There will be days when the practice feels far away, days when you fall back into old habits of criticism or neglect. That's okay. The measure of metta is not in perfection, it's in how you return. You return like a parent who never stopped waiting, like a friend who never gave up hope. And slowly, the parts of you that were once exiled begin to trust again. They step forward, they speak, they ask for what they need, and you listen. Because now you know, loving kindness is not indulgence, it's liberation. You don't become lazy, you become alive. You don't lose your edge, you lose your self-hate. You don't float away, you come home. You begin to live from a center that is unshakable, because life stops being hard, but because you stop being hard on yourself. That's the power of metta. It doesn't shout, it doesn't perform, it doesn't rush. It waits, it returns, it heals. And so do you. There's a moment right after the kindness has been offered, after the tears have softened, after the old voices inside have been heard, where something quiet settles. It's not a conclusion, it's not a solution. It's just a stillness that holds everything without asking for anything to change. This stillness is not empty, it's full of presence. And in this next step of the journey, we turn our attention toward this subtle but powerful space. A space where nothing is forced, and yet everything is met. Where your nervous system remembers how to rest without permission. This is the sacred pause. The pause is not about stopping everything. It's not an escape. It's not zoning out or disconnecting from life. It's the opposite. The pause is when you choose to step back, not to avoid, but to reconnect. It is a radical act of wholeness. In the Mahayana tradition, the practice of compassion begins with knowing how to stop running, fixing, analyzing, solving just long enough to feel what is truly here. Modern life teaches you to respond instantly, to text back, answer quickly, decide fast, keep moving. But underneath that constant motion, your body is quietly asking, can we breathe? Can we slow down long enough to feel safe again? The sacred pause offers that breath. It offers a break in the loop, not the kind of break where you distract yourself with screens or background noise, but the kind where you become still enough to hear yourself again, still enough to feel your own aliveness. In nervous system terms, this pause helps reset the stress response. When you're constantly stimulated by fear, pressure, responsibility, your body stays in a sympathetic state. The heart races. The muscles stay braced. Digestion slows. But when you pause with awareness, you activate the parasympathetic state. The body begins to repair. You return to a place of balance. But this can't be forced. You don't say to your body, calm down now. You don't push your mind into silence. Instead, you gently step out of the momentum. You let the nervous system slow down naturally, like a spinning top coming to rest. This is why compassion practices in Mahayana Buddhism begin with grounding. Before offering care to anyone else, the bodhisattva learns to sit, to breathe, to sense. The pause isn't separate from compassion, it is compassion. Because when you pause, you stop reacting from fear. You stop projecting old pain onto new situations. You begin to respond from presence. And presence is not neutral, It carries warmth, it carries clarity, but most of all, it carries the energy of enough. The pause says, nothing more is needed right now, just this. This moment of stillness does something subtle. It interrupts the cycle of self-rejection. When you pause, you're no longer running from discomfort or grasping at relief. You are saying, I am here, even if it's messy, even if I don't know what comes next. That kind of self-contact is healing in itself. The sacred pause is also a doorway. It lets you see what's underneath the noise. Sometimes that means grief, or old fear, or unprocessed anger. These emotions don't surface to harm you. They surface because for the first time there is enough stillness for them to be heard, and heard gently. This is where nervous system healing becomes spiritual practice. You're not just managing symptoms, you're welcoming what was pushed away. You're telling your body and heart, you don't have to hide anymore. And slowly the layers begin to unwind. But it's important to say, the pause is not always comfortable. Stillness can be confronting. For someone who's learned to cope by staying busy, stillness may feel like drowning. That's why the sacred pause must be approached with respect, not demand. You ease into it, you learn its language. One of the most powerful tools in this practice is noticing. Noticing when you're speeding up, when you're holding your breath, when your shoulders are creeping up. These are signs that you've left yourself. The pause is the gentle invitation to return, to your breath, to your body, to your heart. And this return doesn't need to take hours. Sometimes a pause is 3 deep breaths. Sometimes it's placing your hand on your chest before you respond. Sometimes it's saying, let me think about that, instead of answering out of pressure. These are small acts, but their impact is deep. Because the pause is not a technique, it's a relationship. You are learning to relate to yourself without urgency, without demand. You're learning to trust that nothing breaks if you stop for a moment. That not everything needs to be solved instantly. That your worth is not in your speed. This practice is also about boundaries, not as rigid walls, but as gentle lines that protect your energy. The sacred pause teaches you to wait before saying yes, to feel into decisions, to check if your body is bracing or opening. You stop being ruled by obligation and start listening for what is true. And in that listening, something opens. The inner wisdom that was always there but drowned out by noise begins to speak. You begin to act from alignment instead of reaction, from truth instead of habit. In Mahayana compassion training, this is known as skillful means. Pausing before acting allows compassion to be skillful, not impulsive. Without the pause, you may give when you're depleted, speak when it's not time, or try to fix what isn't yours to carry. But with the pause, you become attuned. Compassion flows where it's needed, without draining you. This also changes how you receive life. When something difficult arises, a challenge, a conversation, a mistake, the pause gives space before judgment. You're not reacting from old patterns. You're meeting the moment with clarity. This makes room for forgiveness, for understanding, even for humor. It also makes room for your body's rhythm. Many people live out of sync with their natural energy cycles. They push through fatigue, override hunger, ignore pain. The pause helps you listen again. You begin to recognize when your body says rest, when it says move, when it says enough. And over time, this creates deep trust within. Trust that you will not abandon yourself in the name of productivity. Trust that your inner world matters. Trust that rest is not failure, it is wisdom. One of the most beautiful things about this practice is its simplicity. You don't need a special setting, you don't need perfect circumstances, you just need a moment. Even in a busy room, you can pause. Even in the middle of conflict, you can pause. The breath is always there, waiting to be remembered. This doesn't mean you detach from life. On the contrary, the pause connects you more deeply. When you stop for a moment, you see more clearly the color of the sky, the tone in someone's voice, the tightness in your own jaw. These are the things that reconnect you to the present. The sacred pause is also an act of reverence for life, for your nervous system, for the quiet intelligence that lives beneath the surface. You begin to realize that rushing is often fear in disguise, and that stillness is not emptiness, but space for meaning to rise. As you practice pausing more often, you might begin to feel emotions that surprise you. Grief that never had time to land, joy that was too subtle to notice before. These moments teach you that your inner life is richer than you thought. That stillness is not boring, it's alive. The body begins to respond, sleep improves, the breath deepens, digestion stabilizes. But more than that, your relationship to yourself softens. You stop needing to get somewhere all the time. You realize this moment, exactly as it is enough to begin again. And that's the hidden wisdom of the sacred pause. It teaches you how to begin again, not from failure, but from kindness. Each time you pause, you return to yourself. Each time you return, you remember that you are whole, not because everything is perfect, but because you are present. You don't have to live in high alert. You don't have to earn your peace. You just need to stop for long enough to remember you are here, you are breathing, and that's enough for now. Let it be enough. And let this pause, right here, right now, hold you. Somewhere between the stillness and the return, a question rises quietly. If I pause long enough to hear myself, what will I do with what I find? Not everything inside feels calm or kind. Under the surface of breath and presence, old voices, still echo voices that criticize, pressure, doubt, and demand. There is a sharpness within that doesn't go away with silence alone. It softens for a moment, then comes back. This is where many people stop, afraid of what lives beneath, but this is also where the real healing begins. The next step is not about silence or stillness. It's about relationship. How do you relate to the parts of you that hurt you? How do you speak to the voice in your mind that calls you lazy, weak, broken? The answer lies in a forgotten practice, one that is more known for how we treat others, but most powerful when turned inward. Ahimsa. Non-violence. Ahimsa is not only about what you don't do. It's not simply refusing to harm someone else. It's a posture of the heart. It's about choosing to respond with gentleness even when pain arises, especially when it arises inside you. This is where most inner violence begins, not from malice, but from habit. From years of thinking that being hard on yourself is necessary to grow, to improve, to become better. Many people think the inner critic is useful, that without it, they'll collapse into laziness or weakness. But the truth is, fear-based self-discipline only leads to burnout, to disconnection, to anxiety that never fully goes away. Ahimsa offers another path: discipline without violence, accountability without shame, growth without attack. To understand how this works, you have to see what inner violence actually looks like. It's not always loud. Sometimes it sounds like constant pressure. Sometimes it's the inability to rest without guilt. It's the voice that says, "You're not trying hard enough," even when you're exhausted. It's comparing yourself to others, not out of inspiration, but to prove your own inadequacy. That's inner violence, and it fragments you. It separates you from your worth. It splits your mind into attacker and attacked, and over time that division wears you down. Ahimsa starts by witnessing this dynamic with clarity, not blame. You begin to notice when the voice of inner harm shows up, and instead of believing it, you question it. Where did this voice come from? Who taught me that I had to be perfect to be loved? You don't fight the voice. Fighting only creates more division. You observe it the way you'd observe a scared child throwing a tantrum, with understanding, with patience, with a soft boundary that says, "You're not in charge anymore." This begins the process of self-reconciliation. You are not trying to silence the voice. You are trying to meet the fear beneath it. Because every harsh inner narrative comes from a deeper wound, from a moment when you were hurt, humiliated, abandoned, or shamed, and your mind created a rule to protect you. If I'm always perfect, I won't be rejected again. If I push myself hard enough, I'll never feel useless. But the mind doesn't know when to let go of old rules, so they keep running, long after the danger is gone. Ahimsa is the practice of telling your system, the danger is over, you're safe now. You don't have to hurt yourself to stay afloat. You begin to replace the attack with curiosity. Instead of saying, "What's wrong with me?" you ask, "What do I need right now?" Instead of pushing through fatigue, you ask, "Can I give myself rest and still respect myself?" These small questions change the chemistry of the brain. They move you out of threat mode and into connection. The nervous system begins to trust again. This is not weakness, this is inner strength, because it takes strength to interrupt cycles that were taught to you so early you didn't even realize they were optional. Ahimsa also means meeting your emotions without weaponizing them. Anger doesn't make you bad. Sadness doesn't make you broken. Fear doesn't make you weak. But when these emotions arise, and the first thing you do is judge them, you add a second layer of pain. The emotion hurts, but the judgment isolates. Ahimsa teaches you to say, "This feeling is here. I don't need to like it, but I don't have to punish myself for it either." In this space, self-compassion becomes something deeper than comfort. It becomes protection. It becomes your boundary against self-harm, emotional, mental, and even physical. One of the hidden ways inner violence shows up is through perfectionism, the constant striving to be flawless, to avoid mistakes, to always be ahead. On the surface, it looks like discipline, but underneath, it's fear. Fear of being seen as weak, fear of being exposed, fear of disappointing others. Ahimsa gently exposes this fear, not to mock it, but to heal it. You begin to question the story. What if I'm enough even when I fail? What if I'm lovable even when I disappoint someone? These aren't affirmations, they're inquiries. Questions that pierce through illusion and let softness enter. And this softness does not mean passivity. On the contrary, people who practice non-violence toward themselves actually become more motivated, because their energy is no longer tied up in defending, pretending, or recovering from self-attack. They can use that energy to act, to grow, to contribute without betraying themselves in the process. Ahimsa also touches how we handle regret. We all have moments we're not proud of, things we said, choices we made, times we gave up on ourselves. Inner violence holds on to these moments like weapons. You'll never change. You always mess it up. But self-reconciliation holds these memories like pages in a story. You turn them gently. You see the pain. You feel the impact. But you also allow for growth. Not denial, not erasure, but growth. You might write a letter to your past self, not to excuse, but to understand. You might apologize inwardly to someone you can't reach anymore, not as punishment, but as a way of restoring integrity. These acts of truth are how inner peace begins to return. Ahimsa also means creating space for uncertainty. Most inner conflict comes from trying to control outcomes. The unknown feels threatening, so the mind scrambles for plans, predictions, rehearsals. And when it can't find certainty, it turns that anxiety inward. You start blaming yourself for not knowing what to do. Nonviolence allows you to say, "I don't know," and that's okay for now. That small permission releases the grip. It lets you meet uncertainty with presence instead of panic. This practice reaches deep into your language too. Notice how often you say things like, "I'm so stupid," or "I always ruin things." These phrases aren't harmless. They reinforce an identity built on harm. Begin replacing them with truth. "That was hard and I'm learning." "I made a mistake, but I'm not a mistake." These aren't feel-good lines. They are medicine. They realign your inner narrative with honesty and kindness at the same time. Ahimsa also teaches you to notice how you handle success. Many people feel guilty for resting or celebrating. They downplay their wins. They fear pride. But this too is a form of harm. You deserve to enjoy your life. You are allowed to feel joy without waiting for it to be taken away. Every moment of celebration is an antidote to a lifetime of self-denial. Allowing yourself to thrive without apology is part of non-violence. It says, "I will no longer punish myself for being human or for being happy." This practice does not mean you never feel anger or frustration or grief. Those are part of being alive. Ahimsa doesn't erase emotion, it honors it, but it refuses to turn emotion into punishment. You can feel anger without becoming cruel. You can feel sorrow without calling yourself broken. You can feel desire without naming it wrong. This is the path of integration. Because in the end, Ahimsa is not a performance. It's not about being nice. It's about becoming whole. When you stop dividing yourself into acceptable and unacceptable, good and bad, worthy and unworthy, you return to your true form. And your true form is not perfect. It is full, changing, real. This is what ends inner fragmentation. Not fixing, not suppressing, but witnessing with love, speaking with care, choosing kindness again and again until the habit of harm begins to unravel. You might start small. A pause before you speak to yourself, a hand on your chest in a moment of panic, a gentle reminder that growth is not linear. These are not grand acts, but they are sacred, because they are how you reclaim your dignity, how you step out of old cycles, how you stop passing on the harm that was passed to you. And that is where healing becomes legacy. Not just for you, but for everyone you touch. The world doesn't need more people pretending to be perfect. It needs more people who have made peace with themselves. So the next time your inner voice turns sharp, pause, listen, breathe. Then answer with the words that maybe no one ever said to you, but you now know how to say. You're doing your best. And that's enough for now. Let those words be the beginning of a new relationship with yourself, with your story, with the world. And let Ahimsa be the path that holds it all together. After the harshness begins to dissolve, after the sharp voices inside start softening under your steady care, a deeper question rises in the stillness. If I am not the judgments I believed, not the failures I feared, not even the stories I carried, then what am I? When you stop fighting yourself, what's left? This is not a crisis. This is the doorway. You are not disappearing. You are beginning to touch something sacred and vast. This is where we meet the teaching that many misunderstand, but that holds a kind of quiet liberation that can change everything. Shunyata, emptiness. This isn't the emptiness that wounds or isolates. This isn't numbness or despair. This is the emptiness that frees. It is not a void but a space, not a lack but a release. It doesn't strip you of meaning, it reveals that meaning was never trapped in fixed form to begin with. When the Buddhists speak of emptiness, they are not pointing to nothing. They are pointing to the freedom of not being held hostage by identity, story, or illusion. This teaching can be uncomfortable at first, because the mind is trained to grasp. It wants solid ground, a clear label, something that says, I am this, that is that. But what if everything you experience, including yourself, is not as solid as it seems? What if everything is shaped by conditions, changing moment to moment? That might sound unsettling, but it's actually the key to your peace. When something is empty of fixed essence, it can move, it can shift, it can breathe. The self that once felt locked into a certain role, a certain wound, a certain outcome, that self begins to open. You are no longer the angry one, the broken one, the anxious one. You are experiencing anger, you are meeting pain, you are walking through fear. But none of these states define you. They appear, they pass, and you remain, but not as a thing, as awareness itself. Emptiness helps you stop clinging to every thought, every feeling, every label as the truth. It lets you loosen your grip, not to detach from life, but to engage with it more clearly. You begin to see that what you called me is not a fixed object, but a flowing process. A dance of breath, thought, memory, sensation, perception, and intentional changing, all conditioned, all connected. This realization brings relief, because so much suffering comes from trying to hold together a solid identity. You try to be consistent, to meet expectations, to protect your image, to fit your past decisions. But in emptiness, you don't have to keep up an act. You don't have to get everything right. You don't have to defend an old version of yourself. You can just meet the moment with presence. Even the pain you feel, when looked at closely, is not a permanent thing. It's sensations, reactions, beliefs. And each part depends on something else to exist. This means pain is workable. It's not your essence. It's a visitor with causes and conditions. Emptiness shows you where the door is. This does not mean life is meaningless. It means meaning is not fixed. It's not handed to you from outside. It arises freshly, through presence, through relationship, through action. When you stop looking for meaning in static forms, you start finding it in simple things, in a breath, in a kind word, in a choice not to react. Understanding emptiness also changes how you hold your past. The mistakes you made, the wounds you received, the roles you played, they all seemed so solid, but they too were impermanent. When you see that those moments were shaped by conditions, by fear, by confusion, by environment, you begin to hold them with compassion, not as facts about who you are, but as steps on a path you're still walking. Even trauma, which leaves deep marks, is not your identity. It's something that happened, something that echoes, but not something that owns you. In emptiness, you find space between the event and the self. You can heal without needing to erase the past or rewrite history. You can simply release your grip. This spaciousness brings a kind of humility that is gentle, not belittling. You no longer feel the need to be right all the time. You no longer define yourself by your opinions. You can say, "I don't know," without shame. You can learn without defending. You can listen without waiting to respond, because the self is no longer a fortress to guard, it's a window to open. The idea that nothing has an independent, permanent essence is not cold, it's warm, with interdependence. If you are not separate, then you are always connected. Every thought shaped by culture, every feeling shaped by relationship, every part of you shaped by causes you didn't choose but which you can now influence, through awareness, through care, through wise action. This is the doorway to compassion. When you see yourself as a changing process, you begin to see others that way too. That person who hurt you, also shaped by causes. That person who frustrates you, also a flow, not a fixed being. This doesn't mean you excuse harm. It means you stop seeing people as static. It means you allow room for change, for others and for yourself. Shunyata also teaches you how to release craving, not through repression, but through insight. You want things because you believe they will make you real, secure, fulfilled. But if the self that craves is not solid, then what you crave won't complete it. You can still enjoy things. You can still feel desire. But you no longer believe your wholeness depends on getting what you want. This makes your joy more available, less dependent, less fragile. You can feel contentment not because everything is perfect, but because you've stopped grasping at perfection. You are resting in what is open, shifting, alive. Even your spiritual path is not exempt. Emptiness reminds you not to cling to progress, not to make enlightenment into another identity. You're not becoming someone else. You're learning how to stop pretending you were ever separate. Every insight is just a reflection in an open sky. There's a simplicity in all this that cannot be faked. When you feel it, you move through the world with less resistance. You don't need to prove your worth. You don't need to hold grudges. You don't need to chase validation. You don't need to build a personality that impresses everyone. You just breathe. You just show up. And what remains when the old masks fall away? Not nothing, clarity, peace, openness. The kind of presence that can hold anything without collapsing. This is not a belief, it's a seeing, something you feel in your bones. The old idea of self becomes lighter, and with that lightness comes freedom. You begin to make choices from stillness, not fear. You begin to relate without losing yourself. You begin to feel whole, not because you are finished, but because you are no longer pretending to be solid. Emptiness also transforms how you work with thoughts. Thoughts are not problems. They're events, temporary, conditioned. When you see them as empty, you stop arguing with them. You let them arise and pass. This breaks the cycle of rumination. You gain energy by not holding every thought so tightly. Even emotions, when viewed through the lens of emptiness, become more manageable. Sadness doesn't define you. Anger doesn't own you. Joy doesn't need to be clung to. Each feeling, just like a wave, rises and falls empty of permanence, but full of experience. You are not the wave. You are the ocean that holds it. This view helps you release attachment, not by force, but through understanding. The things you grasp at, whether status, security, or approval, no longer hold the same grip when you see they too are empty. This does not make you cold. It makes you wise. You still care. But your care is no longer laced with desperation. And when things fall apart, as they sometimes do, you don't fall with them. You feel the pain. You honor the loss. But you don't lose yourself. Because the self was never a possession. It was always an unfolding. This gives you resilience, not through armor, but through spaciousness. Shunyata also protects you from spiritual pride. It reminds you that the path is not about becoming special. It's about dissolving what was never true. The ego that wants to be awakened, recognized, praised this too, is empty. You smile at it. You bow to it, but you don't believe it anymore. This is where real humility is born, the humility that comes not from shame, but from wonder. You don't need to stand out, you just need to show up fully, empty of self-importance, full of presence. And what about meaning? If everything is empty, where does meaning come from? It arises, moment by moment, through connection, intention, and love, not fixed, but alive. You don't chase it, you create it, through your attention, through your choices, through your willingness to meet life without needing to hold it. This is the freedom emptiness offers, not detachment, but depth, not apathy, but intimacy. You see more because you cling less. You love more because you grasp less. You suffer less because you resist less. Shunyata is not a concept to master. It is a space to enter. A gentle loosening. A return to the fluid nature of everything, including you. And when you let yourself dissolve into that spaciousness, not to disappear, but to become real, you may find a peace that doesn't depend on anything. a clarity that holds everything, a wholeness that doesn't need to be proved. Nothing has to be missing, nothing has to be added. You are already home, because the one who was searching was never separate from the space they sought. And that space open, kind, ungraspably is always here, waiting without waiting, empty, full, free. When the weight of needing to hold everything together begins to fall away, and you're no longer trying to become someone solid just to feel safe, what begins to rise is not emptiness in the way you feared. What rises is softness, an openness that feels like truth, but not the kind that overwhelms or breaks you. It feels like something you always knew but had no words for. In that quiet return, you may notice something vulnerable surfacing. Not weakness, but a part of you that never had the chance to be fully seen. The one who once hoped without hesitation. The one who absorbed shame before they knew how to speak. The one who learned to hide to stay safe. That part is not gone. It has been waiting for the moment you could meet it without fear. This is the sacred re-entry. This is where reparenting begins, not with control, but with care. Not with fixing, but with recognition. Reparenting the inner child isn't about returning to the past to change what happened. It's about being present now in a way you never had before. It's about bringing into this moment the kind of presence that your younger self needed but didn't receive. And it's not something you imagine abstractly. It becomes a real relationship inside you. The Yogacara tradition describes Tathagatagarbhate Buddha Naturas, something innate in all beings. This isn't a concept. It's a direct recognition that beneath the layers of fear, coping, and conditioning, there is a quality of clarity, compassion, and wisdom already present. Not something you build, but something you uncover. It means your worth was never in question. Not when you were 5, not when you made mistakes, not even now. This is where reparenting and Buddha nature meet. You aren't just comforting your inner child, you're restoring their reflection in truth. In most of us, that child was shaped by early patterns of protection. Maybe it learned to stay quiet to avoid conflict. Maybe it became helpful to earn affection. Maybe it became invisible to avoid harm. These patterns were intelligent at the time, but when left unquestioned, they continue to direct adult behavior long after they're useful. Gentle reparenting means you stop judging those survival responses and begin to understand them. It's the practice of becoming the adult, your younger self, needed, not perfect, not always certain, but kind, present, and attuned. You begin by noticing what activates the child in you. It might be a harsh tone, a perceived rejection, or being ignored. These moments are not signs of regression. They are invitations. Invitations to turn toward, not away. When you feel small, unworthy, or ashamed, you're often reliving a moment where love was withdrawn or replaced by pressure. The adult part of you may try to move past it, rationalize it, or distract from it. But the child part needs acknowledgement. Instead of silencing it, you learn to listen, not with words alone, but with attention. What does this part need right now? Sometimes it's reassurance. Sometimes it needs permission to be angry or scared. Sometimes it just needs to be held in awareness without being told to get over it. Reparenting through the lens of Buddha nature is unique because it doesn't treat the inner child as damaged. It recognizes that even the wounded parts carry clarity, that your longing for connection, your sensitivity, your instincts for truth, those were never flaws. They were signs of life, of consciousness alive and reaching. So healing doesn't mean turning the child into something else. It means creating the conditions for their natural innocence to resurface. Not naive innocence, but the kind that sees clearly and loves anyway. This process can be supported through practice. One simple way is inner dialogue, not forced affirmations, but honest check-ins. You might close your eyes and speak to that part directly. I see you. I hear what you're afraid of. You're safe with me now. Over time, this begins to feel less awkward and more natural. Because you are not creating something new, you are repairing a connection that was interrupted. Another powerful support is visualization. Not escape, but repair. You might picture a safe place where the child is free to rest, to speak, to play. A place that has never been touched by judgment. You may imagine your adult self walking into that space and offering presence, not instruction. It's not about pretending the past didn't happen. It's about allowing a new kind of memory to grow. The nervous system can begin to believe in safety again. It can learn that support is possible. That protection doesn't have to come through tension. Embodiment also matters here. The inner child lives in the body more than in thoughts. A tight belly, a collapsed posture, a clenched jaw, these are often the child's voice. Reparenting means checking in with your physical state, placing a hand over your heart, letting the breath deepen, giving your body the signal, we're not in danger now. Consistency is key, not perfection. The child doesn't need a flawless parent. It needs a reliable one who shows up even after forgetting, who doesn't leave when things get messy. The more you return to this relationship, the more trust builds inside you. Some people fear that reparenting will make them soft, weak, or overly emotional, but the truth is, it creates resilience. Not the brittle kind that endures everything in silence, but the flexible kind that knows how to rest, how to speak, how to say no. When the child inside feels safe, the adult can move through the world with more freedom. This also changes how you relate to others. You become less reactive, less needy, less guarded, because you are no longer outsourcing your self-worth to other people. You're meeting your own needs with compassion. And from that place, relationships become more honest, more rooted, more spacious. The practice of recognizing Buddha nature also prevents spiritual bypassing. You don't skip the pain, you don't deny the trauma, but you stop making it your core identity. You hold both truths. This happened, and it hurt, and this is not the whole of who I am. You can be in pain and still be pure. You can carry scars and still radiate wisdom. The inner child knows this before anyone taught it otherwise. It was only over time, through comparison and criticism, that you started to doubt it. The more you stay close to this part of you, the more your adult choices begin to align with truth, not fear. You stop chasing validation. You stop trying to perform healing. You begin to live with a quiet integrity, a life that feels safe from the inside. The child doesn't need you to become a different person. It needs you to stop abandoning yourself. It needs your honesty more than your success, your gentleness more than your strength. And in time, that part of you that once flinched, that once disappeared to survive, begins to stand. Not in rebellion, not in anger, but in presence. You reclaim your voice, not to shout, but to speak clearly. You reclaim your body, not to control, but to inhabit fully. You reclaim your boundaries, not as punishment, but as care. This is the quiet revolution of reparenting. It doesn't come with dramatic shifts. It comes with a steady warmth that says, I'm not leaving. Buddha nature is not something to earn. It's something to remember. Every act of care, every return to presence, every moment of stillness, it all clears the dust from what was always there. You are not broken. You are covered. Covered by pain, yes, by conditioning, by shame, by confusion. But none of that changes what's underneath. And when the child inside sees that you remember who they are, not what happened to them, but who they are beneath it, all they begin to return. With eyes that trust, with hands that reach, with a quiet glow that doesn't need permission anymore. This is not the end of the story, but it's the beginning of one told from love, not survival. And that makes all the difference. When care becomes consistent, when the inner child is no longer left waiting, something in your nervous system begins to shift. You stop bracing for abandonment. You stop apologizing for your own needs. You begin to rest not just in the body, but in the unfolding of your life. There's less urgency to fix, to know, to arrive. And yet, beneath this new calm, a deeper question begins to surface. If healing is not about force and identity is not fixed, then how do things really change? If you're not in control of everything, are you simply at the mercy of chaos? This is where a wiser rhythm is revealed. Not chaos, not control, but interdependence, the middle way. This is the doorway to understanding dependent origination, pratitya samutpada, the law that explains why things happen and why you don't have to control everything to be free. Dependent origination is not abstract philosophy. It's the living pattern beneath your everyday experience. It explains why you feel what you feel, why you react the way you do, why you suffer, and, more importantly, how that suffering is not permanent or personal. At its core, this teaching shows that nothing arises on its own. Everything you think of as you is built on causes and conditions. Your habits, your emotions, your beliefs, they're all shaped by something that came before. This isn't meant to dismiss responsibility. It's a way of dissolving shame. When you see clearly that your reactions are not flaws but effects of earlier events, your lens softens. You're not defective. You're conditioned, and conditioning can change. The mind often wants to make everything personal. Why am I like this? Becomes a kind of self-attack. But through the lens of dependent origination, that question becomes deeper. What causes are at play here? It's a move from blame to understanding, from resistance to compassion, from trying to control to learning how to observe. This shift opens space. You no longer react as quickly. You pause, you inquire, you see the pattern, and slowly you stop feeding the pattern. This is where freedom begins, not by overpowering your habits, but by understanding their roots and no longer giving them fuel. In daily life, this looks like noticing that anger isn't just an emotion that appears. It has conditions. Maybe it starts with a feeling of being dismissed, which arises because of an old wound, which exists because someone in your past didn't listen. When you trace it back like this, you stop seeing anger as your identity and start seeing it as a process. And when it's a process, you can meet it with wisdom instead of shame. Trusting the process doesn't mean you surrender to every impulse. It means you see that everything has a story, and you give yourself time to read it. This removes urgency. It allows you to respond with care. It's not passivity, it's deep engagement without force. You begin to see how your environment, your routines, and your relationships all influence your thoughts and feelings. This empowers you to make wise changes without needing to control outcomes. You adjust the causes rather than fight the effects. That's real agency. The most important shift here is from control to trust. Control believes that if you grip tightly enough, nothing will fall apart. But trust knows that even if things fall, you are capable of meeting what comes. Control tries to force certainty. Trust allows space for wisdom to emerge. This perspective also changes how you see other people. When someone behaves in a way that hurts you, you don't rush to condemn. You begin to see their action as the result of their own conditioning. This doesn't excuse harm, but it offers clarity. It helps you hold boundaries without hatred. It helps you speak truth without needing to punish. In relationships, this is vital. Often, conflict arises not from what's happening in the moment, but from the chain of reactions beneath it. One word triggers a fear. That fear sparks a defense. That defense provokes more fear, and so it spirals. But if even one person sees the chain and steps out of it, the cycle starts to dissolve. This is how systems shift. One insight at a time, one pause at a time, one small decision to respond differently. And the beauty of dependent origination is that it works both ways. Just as pain can grow from small causes, so can freedom. A kind word can interrupt a cycle of silence. A single breath can reset a flood of anxiety. These are not cliches. They are real shifts in the web of conditions that shape your life. Understanding this law also brings peace to the unknown. You stop expecting life to unfold in straight lines. You know that everything is moving, changing, interwoven. So when things don't go as planned, you don't panic. You adjust. You listen. You trust that something else might unfold, something unseen but not random. This kind of trust is not passive. It is steady. It keeps you grounded when things fall apart. It gives you courage when clarity hasn't yet arrived. It teaches you to sit with the tension of not knowing and still act with care. In spiritual practice, this changes everything. You stop measuring progress by how often you feel calm. You start noticing the subtle ways your reactivity lessens, your compassion deepens, your need to prove yourself fades. You're not trying to force awakening. You're aligning your life with the conditions that support it. Practice becomes less about effort and more about cultivation. You focus on the soil, not just the fruit. You ask, what am I feeding with my attention? What am I reinforcing with my choices? This is how you shift your inner environment, not through harsh discipline, but through wise care. Even suffering becomes a teacher. You no longer ask, why is this happening to me? But what is this showing me? You learn to sit with discomfort, not as punishment, but as information. You begin to see where you're clinging, where you're resisting, where you're caught. And with that seeing, the knot begins to loosen. This isn't about analyzing everything. It's about gently tracing the shape of your experience so you can meet it with clarity. When you do this, you discover something liberating. There's always a choice. Not between good and bad, but between awareness and unconscious repetition. The more you trust this unfolding, the less you need things to look a certain way. You stop chasing peak experiences. You start appreciating ordinary moments. You begin to find meaning in the process itself. Not in getting somewhere, but in how you relate to what is here. This kind of trust is revolutionary in a world that demands constant proof, results, and perfection. It allows you to rest while still being fully engaged, to grow without self-rejection, to live from presence instead of performance. It also transforms how you respond to setbacks. Instead of collapsing into despair or blaming yourself, you pause, you reflect. You ask what conditions led to this moment and what small shift might change the next one. This makes every moment a doorway, not to escape, but to return. In this framework, even small gestures carry weight. A moment of listening, a breath before reacting, a compassionate thought. Each one shifts the pattern, not dramatically, but deeply. Because the process isn't linear, it's layered. And every layer you touch with awareness changes the whole. You begin to notice how your intentions shape your experience. When your actions come from fear, they leave residue. When they come from clarity, they bring ease. This doesn't mean you never make mistakes. It means you see mistakes as part of the path, not as detours, but as teachings. Dependent origination also reveals the illusion of isolation. You see how every choice, every word, every silence echoes. Your healing affects others. Your presence stabilizes more than just your own life. This doesn't make you responsible for everything. It makes you connected. That connection brings dignity, humility, grace. And grace is what allows you to keep going, even when results aren't immediate. You begin to see the long arc, the quiet changes, the unseen ripples. You stop needing to measure everything. You learn to trust the invisible shifts. You become patient, not out of resignation, but out of faith in the pattern. This trust lets you hold uncertainty without hardening. It lets you face difficulty without losing heart. It lets you offer care without needing recognition. It lets you live with purpose that isn't driven by ego. And when life surprises you, when it collapses, opens, rearranges you, no longer panic. You meet it with a steady gaze. You ask what wants to emerge now, what's ready to be let go, what's asking to be nurtured, because you know you're not alone in any of it. Everything is part of something larger. Everything is part of something arising together. That is the essence of dependent origination. Not control, not fate, but unfolding, guided not by certainty, but by awareness, held not by rules, but by relationship, made sacred not by destination, but by the willingness to walk, to listen, and to trust that the path reveals itself one step at a time. This is not just spiritual wisdom, it's a new way of living, a way that no longer needs to hold everything tightly, a way that allows you to breathe, to move, to become, fully, gently, without forcing, and always with trust. As the habit of grasping loosens and the body begins to trust that it can rest in life's unfolding, something deeper surfaces, not louder but heavier. It has been sitting quietly beneath the movement and reflection, carried for years without full awareness. Shame. Not the loud shame of public error or sharp embarrassment, but the silent kind. The kind that creeps into the way you see yourself, that shapes your voice when you speak, that makes you shrink in subtle moments without knowing why. It lives in the pauses between your thoughts. It colors how you treat yourself. This is the moment to face it, not with more judgment, but with the wisdom that has been growing in you since the beginning of this path. Shame doesn't need more analysis. It needs understanding. It needs light. It needs to be met with the same gentleness you've been learning to apply in silence, in breath, in compassion. The Buddhist teachings offer a clear framework for this, methods that were never about perfection, but about freeing the heart from the misunderstandings that keep it small. Shame thrives in isolation. It convinces you that you're alone in your failures, different in your flaws, unworthy of belonging. But Buddhism begins from the truth of shared suffering. The first noble truth says that pain is part of life, not because you did something wrong, but because you are alive. This reframes shame entirely. It takes it out of the realm of identity and places it within the human condition. You're not broken, you're human. And that's the doorway to healing. Inner criticism is often mistaken for motivation. Many people have been taught that being hard on themselves is how growth happens. But this belief causes harm. It splits the mind, creating an inner attacker and an inner victim. The Buddha called this kind of division one of the causes of suffering, not because anger is wrong, but because it misunderstands the way the mind works. You don't need to fight yourself to improve. You need to understand yourself to become free. The 5 hindrances give us a direct way to see the patterns that block this freedom. These are not sins or flaws. They are mental states that cloud awareness. Each one, when understood, points to a need underneath. They are not enemies, they are signals. The first hindrance is sensual desire. It shows up when the mind reaches outward to soothe something unprocessed. It might look like chasing pleasure or numbing pain. But underneath it is a desire to feel whole. Shame often feeds this pattern by telling you that stillness is unsafe, that you must escape yourself to survive. The practice here is not to suppress the desire, but to meet the need behind it. What part of you is longing to be comforted? When you bring presence to the ache itself, you begin to untangle it from craving. The second hindrance is ill will. This includes anger, resentment, irritation, and often self-directed hostility. When shame takes root, it can grow into a quiet rage at yourself for being the way you are. You might hear it in your thoughts. Why am I still like this? Why can't I get it right? The method here is softening, not giving in, but turning toward the harshness with curiosity. When you name it gently, this is ill, will you create space? And in that space, kindness becomes possible. You begin to see that the anger you carry was often learned from others. It's not your voice, it's an echo. The third hindrance is sloth and torpor. It's the fog that settles over the mind when shame feels too heavy to face. You may feel numb, unmotivated, or distant. This isn't laziness. It's a natural freeze response. The nervous system slows down when it feels unsafe. The practice here is gentle arousing of energy, not by force, but through small, loving action. A walk, a breath, a question asked with care. What's possible right now? Just one step. The fourth hindrance is restlessness and worry. The mind spins in endless loops, trying to escape the weight it carries. Thoughts jump from one fear to another. Shame can drive this pattern by telling you that you have to fix everything before you're allowed to feel peace. But the practice is stillness, not by shutting down the mind, but by returning to the breath again and again with compassion. You don't need all the answers to be okay. You just need to come back now. The fifth hindrance is doubt. This is perhaps the most corrosive in the context of shame. It whispers, "This path won't work. You're too far gone. You'll never really change." But this isn't wisdom. It's fear. The practice is not to argue with doubt, but to keep practicing. To build confidence not through belief, but through experience. You remember your intention. You return to your breath. You do the next kind thing. And slowly, trust grows. These hindrances are not barriers to shame healing, they are maps. Each one reveals the conditions that shame thrives in. And when met with understanding, each one loses its grip. Right effort is the next step. It's the guiding light in working with the hindrances. Not the kind of effort that strains, but the kind that knows when to lean in and when to rest. It's about applying just enough energy, not too much to cause tension, not too little to drift into inertia. Right effort has 4 parts: preventing unwholesome states from arising, abandoning unwholesome states that have arisen, cultivating wholesome states not yet present, and maintaining wholesome states already present. In working with shame, the first step is to prevent the mind from falling into known traps. This means learning your patterns. If you know certain habits, conversations, or media leave you in self-judgment, you begin to limit your exposure not from fear, but from wisdom. The second step is abandoning unwholesome states. When inner criticism arises, you meet it with clarity. You don't believe it automatically. You question it. You ask, is this true? Is this helpful? What would love say instead? This weakens the pattern over time. The third step is cultivating wholesome states. This includes compassion, patience, and self-forgiveness. These are not moods, they're muscles. You strengthen them through daily choices. You speak to yourself gently. You create rituals of care. You choose presence when avoidance would be easier. The fourth step is sustaining those states. This is where trust deepens. You begin to see that kindness is not a temporary feeling, it's a path. You walk it even when it's hard. Even when shame whispers that you don't deserve it. You stay with your intention. You stay with your breath. Buddhist practice does not promise that shame will disappear overnight. It promises that with awareness, you can stop being ruled by it. Shame loses power when it's seen without fear. When it's met with wisdom, it becomes part of your story, not the whole story. And when shame is no longer running the show, something deeper starts to emerge. Not confidence as performance, but dignity. You begin to feel worthy, not because you're perfect, but because you're present. You make peace with your imperfection. You stop proving. You start being. This transformation changes how you walk in the world. You set boundaries without guilt. You express needs without apology. You rest without justification. You no longer need to earn belonging. You embody it. The mind quiets, not because it has no thoughts, but because it no longer attacks. The body relaxes, not because there's no pain, but because it's no longer bracing against self-hate. Your choices become more aligned, not to impress others, but to honor your own wholeness. This is not a final state, it's a practice, a way of moving through each day with integrity and softness. Shame may still visit, but it no longer defines the room. It becomes a signal, not a sentence. And over time, as you keep meeting it with wisdom, the space inside you grows. You begin to trust that you are more than your worst moments, that your worth is not fragile, that your essence is not up for debate. This is what it means to move from shame to wholeness, not by erasing the past, but by bringing it into the light, not by silencing the inner critic, but by giving the inner truth a stronger voice, not by pretending you're flawless, but by knowing you are still and always worthy of love. When shame no longer dictates your steps, and the voice within begins to sound more like a friend than an enemy, a kind of spaciousness opens up. You are no longer busy defending yourself or proving your worth. There is room to ask, not from fear, but from sincerity. What is my life really for? What am I here to live, offer, create? Not as a performance, not for validation, but from a quiet place inside that longs to serve something deeper than ego. This is the turning point where attention shifts from self-repair to alignment, a movement away from survival and toward meaning. Not the kind of meaning that inflates identity, but the kind that comes gently, like a whisper. This is the Dharma. Dharma is not a job description. It's not the title on a business card or a set of goals on a vision board. Dharma is the expression of truth through your life. It's the way your unique presence meets the world when you are fully aligned with what is real. It's not one path for everyone. It's not about achieving something. It's about becoming clear enough to hear what life is asking from you, not what the ego wants to take. The ego seeks status. Dharma seeks sincerity. The ego grasps at significance. Dharma listens for truth. The ego builds identity. Dharma dissolves it. This is not a rejection of identity altogether, but a softening of its grip. When identity is held lightly, it becomes a vehicle, not a prison. You begin to recognize that your purpose is not a product of pressure. It's not revealed through striving. It unfolds as striving dissolves. In this way, Dharma doesn't shout, it whispers. And to hear the whisper, the noise has to quiet, not by force, but by attention. Stillness becomes essential not as a dramatic silence, but as the background that makes subtle signals clear. This clarity is not sudden. It arrives slowly, through presence. Often, you only notice it in hindsight. The things that light you up, the moments that feel whole, even when unnoticed by others. The tasks that pull you into a flow where time loses its grip. These are signs, not of talent alone, but of alignment, where life and awareness meet with ease. Listening to Dharma means releasing comparison. No one else can walk your path. No one else can tell you what is yours to carry. Advice may help you orient, but your deepest direction comes from stillness. And that direction rarely arrives as a full map. It comes in steps. One choice, one conversation, one brave decision to say yes when fear says no. Ego wants certainty. Dharma invites trust. And trust is what grows when you commit to acting from what feels real, even if you don't know where it will lead. You begin to value inner congruence more than external approval. You choose authenticity over applause. And strangely, in doing so, you begin to connect more deeply with others, not through roles, but through presence. Spiritual materialism, a term used by teachers like Chogyam Trungpa, refers to the way ego uses even spiritual growth to reinforce itself. You meditate to be seen as enlightened. You serve others to feel superior. You collect teachings like badges instead of applying them as medicine. When this happens, the Dharma is lost, even if the language remains. Real Dharma work involves stripping away performance. It's about coming back to what is true before it becomes impressive. It's about humility, not ambition. You don't need to be known. You need to be sincere. Dharma doesn't need spotlight. It thrives in honest action, however small. This work requires deep listening, not just in formal practice, but in life. The way your body feels after a conversation, the energy behind your decisions, the texture of your attention when you work. These are all places where alignment reveals itself. When you are on the path of your Dharma, even difficulty feels meaningful. When you're off, even success feels hollow. But the path is not fixed. Dharma evolves as your insight deepens. What was once aligned may no longer fit. That's not failure, it's refinement. You learn to let go when it's time, not because you've given up, but because life is pointing elsewhere. Attachment to form, even spiritual form, can block deeper unfolding. Right livelihood, as part of the Eightfold Path, points to this. It means choosing work that doesn't harm others, yes, but more deeply, it means choosing a way of living that expresses your values. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but with integrity. When your daily actions reflect your inner truth, suffering lessens even if circumstances are hard. This alignment also shifts your sense of success. It becomes less about how much you produce and more about the quality of presence behind what you do. You might speak fewer words, but they carry weight. You might serve in quiet ways, but the impact runs deep. You stop needing proof. You start trusting your own experience. This does not mean you'll never doubt your path. Doubt is part of growth. It sharpens discernment. But you no longer use doubt as a weapon against yourself. You see it as a signal to pause, to listen more closely. You trust that direction will return, not through striving, but through stillness. Purpose is not found, it is revealed. And often, what reveals it is your willingness to stay close to discomfort, to remain awake in the in-between spaces where clarity hasn't yet arrived. The Dharma unfolds not only in clarity, but in confusion, in waiting, in surrender. You also begin to realize that Dharma is not always grand. It might not lead to recognition or legacy. Sometimes, your path is to offer presence in quiet places, to tend to what others ignore, to do small things with immense care. This is not lesser work, it is the essence of service. Even failure becomes part of the path. When you act from alignment and things fall apart, it's not a sign you were wrong. It's a refinement. Life removes what no longer fits. You lose jobs, relationships, roles, but what remains is more honest, more real. You begin to see how much energy you once spent holding up what wasn't truly yours. This shedding brings grief, yes, but also freedom. You're no longer carrying what drains you. You're no longer pretending. What arises in its place is quieter, but steadier. A life that may not look impressive from the outside, but feels rooted from within. When you meet others from this place, your presence becomes healing. Not because you have answers, but because you're living from alignment. You don't offer advice, you offer being. You're not trying to fix, you're bearing witness. This kind of presence cannot be faked. It's felt. As you live from Dharma, even your spiritual practice changes. It becomes less about achieving states and more about deepening into truth. You practice not to become something else, but to become more fully yourself. The self that is not ego, but expression, not a thing, but a movement, alive and evolving. And with that comes a new kind of peace. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of clarity. You still feel pain, you still face hardship, but you're no longer lost. You are connected to something greater than your self-concept, something deeper than your plans, something sacred. This is not something you chase, it's something you listen for. And when you hear it, you respond. That response is the path. That response is your offering. That response is your dharma. And in time, you stop asking what your purpose is and start living it not as an answer, but as a practice. You begin each day not with a plan to prove, but with a question to serve. How can truth move through me today? This is the whisper, this is the way. And this is the peace that comes not from control, but from surrendering to what is already waiting in you, quietly, patiently, completely. When purpose no longer depends on applause and meaning arises from simple, truthful acts, something in the heart begins to soften. The striving that once filled your days loses its pull. You no longer chase importance. You no longer need to be seen to feel real. But even in this quiet strength, there can still be a subtle ache, a longing to be recognized, a silent wish to be celebrated for the goodness you offer without being asked. When that recognition doesn't come, something inside may begin to dim, not out of resentment, but out of fatigue. This is where another form of joy waits to be uncovered, a joy not tied to personal achievement, a joy that lives in the success of others, a joy that heals the wounds of invisibility. This is the power of mudita. Mudita, or sympathetic joy, is one of the 4 immeasurables in Buddhist teachings. It is the ability to take delight in the happiness of others, not because it benefits you, but because it reflects the natural goodness that life can hold. It is the antidote to envy, comparison, and scarcity. It is also the medicine for the hidden grief of being overlooked. In a world where value is often measured by visibility, practicing joy for others without needing it for yourself is radical. It's not about pretending you're happy when you're hurting. It's about shifting the source of joy from the self-image to the shared field of goodness. When someone else receives what you've longed for, the reflex may be to shrink, to measure your worth against theirs. But mudita invites you to expand instead. This expansion is not automatic. It requires training, it requires presence, and it requires honesty about the subtle pain that sometimes shows up when others succeed. That pain is not wrong, it's human. It's the residue of a culture that taught you to compete, to compare, to constantly ask, what about me? Mudita doesn't ask you to deny that pain. It asks you to hold it with care, while also making space for a joy that is not about possession, but about possibility. You begin by noticing small moments where joy is available without effort. A child laughing, a friend finding peace, a stranger being helped. These are not your victories, but they belong to no one. They are part of a shared field. When you let yourself feel moved by them, without turning them into stories about your lack, something quiet begins to shift inside. The heart, once clenched by scarcity, begins to loosen. The need to compare softens. You begin to see that joy is not a limited resource. It does not decrease by being shared. In fact, the more you celebrate joy in others, the more attuned you become to joy in general. Not surface pleasure, but the deeper pulse of aliveness that runs through all beings. This practice becomes even more powerful when applied during moments of invisibility. When your efforts go unnoticed, when others receive what you've quietly worked for, when recognition is withheld. Instead of feeding resentment, You pause, you breathe, you remember. Their joy does not take yours away. Their light does not cast you into darkness. Your worth is not diminished by their visibility. You may even say silently, may their happiness continue. May their success bring more goodness into the world. Not to bypass your feelings, but to expand your field of awareness. You are reminding your heart that it is big enough to hold both longing and celebration, that your dignity is not determined by external acknowledgement. This kind of joy becomes a mirror. You begin to see that what you appreciate in others often reflects your own values. When you feel touched by someone's kindness, it is because you recognize the same seed in yourself. When someone shines and your heart lights up, it is a quiet remembering that light lives in you, too, even if it hasn't been seen yet. Mudita also helps dissolve the illusion of separateness. In a culture driven by individualism, joy is often privatized. We are taught to claim it, defend it, and measure it. But sympathetic joy sees through that illusion. It recognizes that joy is relational, that it is less about having and more about sensing, less about ownership and more about openness. When someone you love succeeds, your happiness doesn't come from the fact that they won. It comes from their smile, their peace, their lightness. It's a resonance. That resonance is available beyond relationships. You can feel it with people you barely know, with people who may never know you. The joy still moves you. It still belongs to the heart. This practice becomes even more refined when extended toward those you envy, not in a forced or performative way, but in a gentle, honest unfolding. You start by acknowledging the pain of comparison. You let yourself feel it without judgment. Then, when ready, you offer a simple wish. May they be truly happy. May that happiness be deep and lasting. These wishes may feel distant at first, but over time they begin to soften the inner edges. The heart becomes less protective, less armored, more open to the beauty that exists beyond personal gain. You also begin to see that mudita protects against burnout. When your joy depends only on your own outcomes, life can feel narrow. But when you are nourished by the joy around you, your well is always being filled. You are no longer waiting for your turn. You are participating in the turning of joy itself. This orientation changes how you move through the world. You celebrate more easily. You give praise more freely. You uplift without needing credit. Not because you're trying to be good, but because it feels natural. The heart finds pleasure in connection, not control. And yet, mudita is not passivity. It is not complacency. It doesn't mean you stop longing, or striving, or dreaming. It means you stop resenting others for having what you don't. You continue to walk your path, but with a lighter heart. A heart that is not closed by comparison. This also makes room for mutual joy. You become someone others feel safe celebrating with. You are not the friend who disappears when things go well for others. You become a steady witness to their rising. Your presence becomes a blessing, not a competition. And in turn, you attract relationships where your own joy can be shared without fear of envy. The deeper your practice of mudita, the less attached you become to specific forms of success. Because you see that what you were really seeking was the feeling, the warmth, the openness, the expansion. And now, that feeling is available through connection, not just achievement. You learn to locate joy in moments of resonance, not reward. In watching someone heal, in hearing someone laugh after a long silence, in seeing beauty, not because it's yours, but because it exists. That is enough. You may still feel moments of inadequacy. That's natural, but those moments no longer define you. You let them pass like weather. You remember that wholeness is not a competition, it is your birthright. This kind of joy becomes your resting place, a place you can return to again and again, especially when the ego feels bruised or unseen. It reminds you that you are part of something larger, that your light does not depend on stage lights, that your life, in its quiet sincerity, is enough. And from this ground, you give more freely, not from emptiness, but from fullness. You give without needing thanks. You give without expecting return. Your joy becomes your offering. And what a rare offering that is, a joy that doesn't take, doesn't perform, doesn't prove, a joy that heals simply by existing, a joy that whispers, "We're in this together," and means it. This is the path of mudita, not easy, but real, not loud, but powerful. A joy that doesn't ask to be seen, but changes everything it touches, quietly, steadily, completely. The heart that learns to rejoice in the happiness of others begins to unbind itself from the endless hunger for validation. It rests more easily in presence. It softens toward others without losing its own center. But even with this opening, even with these new ways of relating, some patterns still return. They resurface in the quiet hours, in the tension of old reactions, in the repetition of pain that seems to have no source. These are not failures. These are echoes. Signs that deeper layers are ready to be seen. Patterns that do not respond to logic or effort or positivity. These are the inner cycles of samsara, unconscious loops that have been spinning inside for years. And the next step on the path is not escape, but recognition. Samsara, in Buddhist teaching, is not only a cosmic cycle of death and rebirth, it is also psychological. It is personal. It plays out in the mind each day through habits of fear, craving, aversion, clinging, and delusion. Samsara is the looping of thoughts that lead you back to suffering, even when you know better. It's not your fault, it's conditioning. But conditioning can be seen, and what is seen clearly can begin to loosen. These inner loops are not always obvious. They may disguise themselves as personality traits, like "I'm just anxious" or "I'm always the one who gives more." But beneath these identities are systems of belief formed long ago, often in response to pain. The mind forms strategies to stay safe, to stay loved, to stay in control. And even when those strategies stop working, they continue to repeat because they are familiar. One way to begin identifying these loops is through reflection, not analysis, but presence. You observe where the mind goes when it feels threatened. Do you disappear? Do you lash out? Do you try to fix everyone around you? These responses are not weaknesses. They are old maps. They made sense once. They don't need shame. They need compassion. You also look at the emotional residue they leave behind. Does a situation leave you drained beyond reason? Is the reaction larger than the moment? That's a sign of samsara at work, past pain, reenacted in the present. Recognizing this brings agency. It interrupts the trance of reactivity. Another entry point is watching your relationship to desire. Craving in Buddhism is not just for food or pleasure, it's for certainty, for control, for identity. When the mind grasps at something and believes it must have it to be okay, the wheel begins to turn. You get the thing, and the relief is short. Then the cycle starts again. Not because you're doing life wrong, but because you're caught in a pattern that can't bring lasting peace. To begin stepping out, you do not attack the craving. You meet it with awareness. You ask gently, "What am I really seeking right now?" Often, the answer is not the thing itself, but a feeling of being whole, being seen, being safe. When you recognize the deeper longing, you can bring care to that place directly, instead of chasing satisfaction through external conditions. Aversion is another wheel that keeps spinning. It appears as resistance, as judgment, as defensiveness. It says, "This shouldn't be happening," and then builds a case. But under aversion is often fear or grief. The reaction is there to protect something tender. Again, the practice is not to suppress, but to meet, to recognize the feeling and name it. Aversion is here. Then breathe, then stay. The staying softens the spin. It tells the nervous system that pain does not have to mean danger. Clinging to identity is perhaps the most subtle form of inner samsara. The idea that you are this kind of person or that you must always act this way to be loved. These fixed self-views may have been useful once, but now they narrow your experience. You may find yourself repeating roles: caretaker, hero, outsider, perfectionist, not because they reflect truth, but because they have become habits. The practice is to loosen identification, not with rejection, but with curiosity. What would it be like to let this role rest? Who am I when I'm not trying to be someone? Delusion, the final component, is not ignorance in the harsh sense. It's more like forgetfulness, forgetting the impermanence of all things, forgetting that pain will pass, forgetting that thoughts are not facts. Delusion fuels the cycle by hiding the way out. The way out is seeing clearly, again and again. You build this clarity through daily presence. You notice the body's signals. You slow down the moment between stimulus and response. You bring kindness to your inner world instead of trying to fix it. This makes space. And in that space, the loop begins to dissolve, not through force, but through understanding. Compassion is essential here. Without it, awareness can become another weapon, another way to judge yourself for repeating old pain. But compassion reframes the loop as a call for care. Each repetition is a doorway back to something that was never fully seen. When you enter with gentleness, the part that's been looping begins to trust. It begins to release. Sometimes insight comes through pain. A relationship ends, and the pattern becomes visible. A setback brings old narratives back to the surface. These moments are hard, but they are also invitations to see the samsara within, to respond differently this time. Not perfectly, just with more awareness. Ritual can help anchor this work. You might light a candle before reflection, or write letters to parts of yourself that feel trapped, or place a hand over your heart when old fear arises. These are not solutions. They are signals to the nervous system, to the heart, that it is safe to see, safe to soften. Community also matters. Samsara thrives in isolation. When you speak your patterns aloud in trusted spaces, their power begins to fade. You see that others have their own loops, that none of us are separate in this struggle. Shared reflection brings shared liberation. The path out of inner samsara is not about reaching a destination. It's about changing your relationship to the cycle. You no longer believe it blindly. You learn its rhythm. You recognize the early signs. And sometimes that recognition alone is enough to stop the wheel. When the mind is free, it doesn't stop thinking. It stops clinging. When the heart is free, it doesn't stop feeling. It stops fearing its own tenderness. This is the liberation that unfolds, not in one great moment, but in small, steady openings. A breath, a pause, a choice to listen instead of react. You begin to find yourself less controlled by past narratives, less pulled by old habits, more able to meet the moment as it is. You still feel, but you don't get lost. You still stumble, but you recover faster. This is not perfection, this is maturity. You stop waiting to be fully healed before you live. You live as you heal. You walk through the cycles with open eyes. And each time you remember more quickly, I don't have to follow this. I can turn inward and meet what's real. I can choose presence over pattern. And slowly the loops lose momentum. They quiet, they dissolve. And what's left is not emptiness but presence, not a void, but a clear space from which you can meet your life freshly, gently, wisely, without needing to repeat what no longer serves. This is the liberation from samsara, not by escape, but by seeing, not by fixing, but by freeing, not all at once, but breath by breath, layer by layer, until what once felt like fate becomes choice, until what once controlled you becomes your teacher, until you return not to who you were, but to the truth that was always waiting beneath the spin. When you begin to recognize the loops within you and meet them without judgment, a subtle clarity grows. You realize that not every feeling needs to be traced to its root, not every reaction needs to be solved. The grip of old narrative starts to loosen, but in its place may come something unfamiliar, quiet confusion, a spaciousness that is not yet filled, a strange stillness where answers used to be. This is not regression, this is not avoidance. This is the beginning of something softer and more profound. It is the entry into not knowing. There is a type of peace that does not come from certainty, a clarity that does not arise from explanation. Zen teachings have long pointed to this path, not through theory or mental frameworks, but through the radical act of resting directly in experience without needing to name it, to sit with what is without dividing it, to welcome emotion not with analysis, but with presence. This is the heart of beginner's mind. Beginner's mind is not naive. It is not pretending you know nothing. It is letting go of the need to know in order to feel safe. It's allowing the mystery of the moment to be as it is, without rushing to interpret, judge, or resolve it. This approach invites a kind of emotional honesty that bypasses performance. You are not managing your feelings, you are meeting them. In daily life, the habit is to label emotions quickly. Sadness, anger, shame. Once labeled, the mind builds a story, and that story can become heavier than the emotion itself. Not knowing interrupts that momentum. It allows space between sensation and story. That space is where integration happens. Not because the emotion is resolved, but because it is allowed to exist without being made into an identity. This is particularly important in moments of overwhelm. When emotion rises like a wave, and the mind tries to define it, fix it, or justify it, something tightens. The more you try to understand in that moment, the more tangled things become. Zen invites a different move, a non-move. Just stay. Feel the sensation in the body. Notice the breath. Let thought pass through without grasping. The feeling may stay or shift, but your relationship to it changes. You're not swimming against it. You're floating within it. This form of presence does not mean suppressing thought